This is the
Five Starr
Podcast.
Let me talk to you. Hi. What do you guys want to talk about? This is such good shit. Thanks, guys. Back to you.
Loading up for this one. As you can probably see by today's title, this will not be a pleasant review session. I even tried to mentally prepare myself for this one, because I knew I was walking right into the fire pit. The last time I even thought about King of the Ring 95 was, probably 28 or 29 years ago when I first saw it. And of course, back then, I didn't really understand how horrible that show was. And now with hindsight being 2020, having spent the last 6 months talking about one of the worst periods in wrestling history, it clicked as I was watching the pay-per-view. Yeah, this thing really sucks. But we have to talk about it. We have committed to the WWF library. I'll have nightmares about it for the next year. But I know you're all just dying to hear me rip into it. Before we do, though, I'm going to keep you all in unnecessary anticipation. So make sure y'all subscribe, comment, like the show if you haven't already. Do it for my sanity. Please give me a reward of some sort. We are on YouTube and Rumble on Mondays and Fridays for new shows and new material. The classic reviews are a pretty big piece of the channel. So hopefully if you're watching, you're at least somewhat invested in old classic wrestling. If not, then you're primarily just sticking around for the WWE reports whenever you sporadically get them. It has taken me a very long time to find a formula that works for this channel. I've tried to give the modern wrestling multiple chances. More often than not, I've been left disappointed. I'll say one more thing about the WWF and then we'll get going. The Raws are mostly lousy. The pay-per-views kind of follow suit. But at least I know they kind of dig themselves out of a hole eventually. I mean, if I make it a couple more years and phase into the Attitude Era stuff, at least I know those shows will give me plenty to talk about. I'll probably hate a good chunk of the stuff that I see during the height of the Russo booking. But at least we know Vince and Austin is coming down the pike. So there's something to look forward to. But I'm just going through this 95 period, man, and it's like an endless tunnel. There's nothing to look forward to. The entire God-blessed year is just the worst. But we made it halfway, so we'll just keep trudging through whatever you would call this period. Clown Show USA. All right. Let's talk about this fucking god-awful show. And I really thought about it. When this was over, and I had all the perspective in the world, having been a fan of this business for well over 30 years, I thought, was this actually the single worst pay-per-view I've ever seen? It's a tough call. I've seen a lot of bad pay-per-views in my heyday. I've ordered plenty of TNA pay-per-views. God, those WCW pay-per-views during the dying years. There were some real dingers. But this WWF King of the Ring from 1995, it was certainly among the worst. I probably should have figured as much when I read the Peacock bio, and it said, Undertaker, Shawn Michaels, and Yokozuna compete in a tournament to become the King of the Ring. Notice the aforementioned names there. Not a peep about Mabel. You know, the guy who fucking won the whole goddamn thing. I tried so hard not to get angry in the first minute. I've already failed. I'm actually going to save this conversation for the end. I want to take the time to actually read you some of the reports that were circulating back when this pay-per-view went down almost 30 years ago. Just so we can all come to an accurate agreement on how horrible this fucking pay-per-view actually was. From journalists and news reporters that I have nothing in common with. We all agreed this was an all-time wretched pay-per-view. So we're in Philly for this thing. The date is June 25th, 1995. A tagline that read, Guts and Glory. Whatever in the hell that's supposed to mean. I guess they were talking about the guts people were coughing up after having suffered through this abomination. And isn't it kind of interesting how the minute we try to sit down and talk about this show, Downpour City, I'm sure you're going to be hearing nothing but rain droplets and white noise in the background. Can never catch a break when I try to sit down and record these goddamn fucking podcasts. So anyway, before we explore the card, I think we need to establish what they were expecting people to pay full pay-per-view price for. If you remove the dark match, which was a last-minute qualifier to determine the replacement for Razor Ramon, because, did I mention, yeah, he couldn't compete because of an injury. So Savio Vega ended up beating Mike Rotunda, or IRS, whatever we're calling him these days, and he took Razor's place. So the matches on this card, again, these were not free of charge. People were expected to pay money to see these matches. We had Savio Vega versus Yokozuna in a tournament round. The Roadie versus Bob Holly in a tournament round. Kama versus Shawn Michaels in a tournament round. Mabel versus Taker in a tournament round. Savio and the Roadie in round 2. Brett and Lawler in the infamous Kiss My Foot match, which I completely forgot actually happened on this pay-per-view and not SummerSlam. I have no clue how I forgot about the fucking match with Isaac Yankem. We had Mabel and Savio in the finals of the King of the Ring, which, stop and think about that for a minute. The finals of the 1995 King of the Ring tournament, Mabel and Savio Vega. Those were the low standards of WWF's talent pool in 1995. And then, of course, we had Bam Bam and Diesel versus Tatanka and Sid Vicious in the main event, which went almost 20 goddamn minutes. That was the moment my blood officially boiled over. And of course, there's a caveat with all these matches. None of them are any good. None of them were pay-per-view quality. And for the most part, None of them were short. So anybody that tries to argue this show is any good, you have my permission to tell those people to eat a raw dick and then lick mine afterwards. Christ almighty. Well, you want to go ahead and talk about this fucking fiasco? Well, too bad. Because we're going to anyway. I'll tell you a bad omen from the jump. When you're not even 3 minutes in, and you get a Stephanie Wine sighting, that's when you know you're in for a clunker. So as noted, it's Savio Vega and Yokozuna in the curtain jerk spot. This entire pay-per-view was, we're basically going to take everything we were going to initially do with Razor before he got hurt, and we're just going to replace him with Savio and pretend nothing's weird about that. Even though by every stretch of the imagination, Savio should have been eliminated in the first round. Instead, they had him outlast the entire gauntlet until he ran into the massive girth that was Mabel. So realistically, had Razor not gotten hurt, it would have been Razor and Mabel in the finals. And at that point, everyone probably figured, well, clearly Razor was scheduled to win the whole damn thing, right? You would think. But because it's Vince, who even knows? I'm sure he still had plans for Mabel to go over all along. So yeah, it's Razor Vega versus Yoko here. Or Savio Ramon. Whichever sounds cooler. Poor Yoko's gone from main eventing SummerSlam 93 as the WWF champion. A little under 2 years later, he's jobbing out in opening pay-per-view matches to underneath flunkies. And I know it sounds like I'm shitting on Savio. It's probably because I'm actually kind of shitting on Savio. I mean, nothing against the guy, but come on now. How on earth is any logical wrestling fan supposed to believe that Savio is easily knocking off former WWF champions like Yokozuna? In pay-per-view openers, no less. After having done jack shit since he showed up to the company a little over a month ago. Now he's coming out on pay-per-view and beating IRS, Yokozuna, and the Roadie in 3 straight matches. Give me a break. So these guys have an incredibly boring match. There was a point where Yoko had a nerve hold applied on Savio for at least 2 weeks. And it's so stupid because I'm pretty sure Razor's injury was not that bad. I mean, you think about it. He wrestles a fucking ladder match with Shawn like 2 months after this. So clearly he's not on the verge of being confined to an iron lung. Was the injury that bad? I mean, he looked perfectly fine standing at ringside playing cheerleader. He was moving like he was okay. Was it kayfabed? I can't imagine it was. Why you'd want to kayfabe a Razor Ramon injury when he would probably be the best worker in the whole fucking tournament? Maybe discount Shawn. That makes no sense. I mean, it was clearly a rib injury because he had some kind of brace thing around his waistline that kind of looked like a rib protector. You know, Owen comes out at the end. He goes after Razor, and you kind of see Razor clutching his ribs after he tried to chase Owen up the rampway. And then Savio and Yoko continue to fight outside. And that's when Yoko ends up charging the ring steps so Savio can roll back in and win via countout. I didn't even really see the spot where Yoko hit the steps because it looks like the camera missed it. It was either that or he hit the ring post. Either way, the match was a total nothing burger. I was so focused watching Razor on the floor the whole time. I mean, I really wasn't even paying all that close attention to what Yoko and Savio were doing, aside from a bunch of boring holds. And this was arguably one of the less insulting segments on the show. And we followed that with the Roadie and Bob Holly in another opening round match. This is where Michael Hayes spent so much time arguing that Bob Holly was going to win. You were just waiting for the anticlimactic swerve when Road Dogg went over. It's like a fucking Russo swerve where you're expecting it so much. When the swerve actually happens, you're not surprised. I repeat what I said at the top of the report. The Roadie versus Bob Holly. You paid for this match. Literally speaking. Not just figuratively. So they're having this match. It's a flunky versus an underneath guy on pay-per-view. The hell were you expecting? It's going along relatively okay until they totally butcher the finish. Bob Holly comes off the top and eats a boot from the Road Dogg. And I think Holly was supposed to kick out of the pin attempt when Road Dogg threw his arm over his chest. But Holly didn't kick out in time. So the ref counts 1. He counts 2. He counts 3. Holly throws a shoulder up at like 3.1. The ref just kind of stands there dumbfounded, surveys the situation, and then he goes, "Okay, fuck it, ring the bell." No idea what happened there. Someone clearly blew a spot. I have to assume it was Holly's fault for not kicking out in time. And so far, we are 30 minutes into the pay-per-view. We still had like another 2 hours to go. I was already throwing in the towel. And that did not bode well when they tried to immediately follow this with a Shawn Michaels interview, where he spent 2 minutes putting himself over and acting like an unbearable douchebag. But they had to set up the match with Kama. And, well, I'm going to begin this by laying out a compliment. The bar was not entirely high. But I think it's safe to say when you look at the entirety of this card, this was probably the single best match on the entire show. Funny enough, it wound up being a 15-minute draw. And that was the part that kind of caught me off guard. I was like, wait, what? There are 15-minute time limits in King of the Ring matches? Well, I thought Vince didn't believe in time limits. Apparently those were a thing, though. In reality, it was the alibi that got them away from having Shawn do a job, but to still eliminate him from the tournament. And it was a fairly good match from a working standpoint. Both guys were putting in effort. It was just for minimal return in the overall scheme of this god-awful pay-per-view. But they worked the story of Shawn trying to match Kama with the boxing jabs early on, which was fucking hilarious. The idea that Shawn would actually win a legit fight with Kama if they ever came to blows. Out of here with that shite. But then Kama took over and worked over Shawn's ribs. Shawn was the babyface in peril until the comeback sequence where he tried to get some quick pins on Kama. And right as he went for the sunset pin, the bell rang as the ref tried to count 3. So neither guy advances to the next round. And as a result, Mabel got a second round bye. But of course, they still had to have Shawn get the last laugh here by kicking Kama in the face with the sweet chin music, which is par for the course. I say it all the time, man, and I'll just keep beating this drum over and over again for the next couple years. If you are not already sick of babyface Shawn Michaels, buckle up. Because if you couldn't already tell, Vince has got a hard-on for this boyhood dream nonsense. I mean, if you couldn't already see what the endgame was for Shawn by WrestleMania the following year, you clearly had blinders on. I wish I had blinders on so I didn't have to witness it. So at this point in the pay-per-view, it was probably divine intervention that stepped in and said, we need to give this thing some life. So they proceeded to air a Bob Backlund campaign ad in Philly, which wound up being a whole lot more entertaining than it probably had any right to be. I especially cracked at the point where he's standing next to the statue of John Barry outside Independence Hall, and he looks off camera to scream, "No! Not Marion Barry!" And then they immediately followed that clip with him asking if someone was directly related to George Washington. For the record, he was black. Which, probably would not have passed the sniff test in 2024 had they tried that same joke. Just saying. And then he made some cheesesteak jokes, which were not as funny. But, yeah, definitely a good time to break out the silliness. If there's one thing we needed about an hour into this debacle of a pay-per-view, it was Bob Backlund making a mockery of the entire city of Philadelphia, and all the people standing behind him openly laughing at how absurd the whole thing is. What wasn't laughable, however, was the match that followed. Mabel versus The Undertaker. Holy fucking shit, this match. Where do I even start? Well, first of all, again, I stand corrected. This is where my historical perspective is not always accurate. So everyone's probably heard this story with Taker and Mabel. There's a match they have at some point in 95 where Mabel ends up breaking Taker's orbital bone. And then Taker has to walk around with a protective face mask on for weeks. I actually thought that injury happened on this pay-per-view. Apparently not. I have no idea when it happens, but I know it's coming soon. Which means that I'm going to have to watch another Taker-Mabel match at some point. God help us all. Regardless, the match is beyond atrocious. Taker's in there working overtime, hitting the ropes as fast as humanly possible to try to keep the energy going. Mabel's basically standing there like a walking tree stump the entire time. He was so blown up by the end of this thing. There's a point where Taker goes to shoot Mabel off the ropes. Mabel was so gassed, he couldn't even run. He just walked over to Taker so they could do whatever spot they had planned. God, it looks so awful. Taker also pulled a Damian Priest in this match, where he got his foot caught in the ring ropes. At least in this case, he was already dangling outside the ring, so there wasn't a whole lot of extra weight pulling on his ankle. But he was trapped there for like a full minute while everybody stood around wondering what they're supposed to do. Eventually, Taker just muscled himself up and basically freed his own foot. No thanks to anybody else. They were all useless. I did like the point in this match where Hayes is calling the spot where Mabel had Taker in a camel clutch. And he goes, "That's 569 pounds across your lower lumbar." And then completely out of character, he just goes, "That's your lower back." Correct. Just in case we did not understand the term lumbar. It was also brought to our attention here, courtesy of Master Hayes on the headset, had Taker and Mabel both been counted out or double disqualified, that would have meant the winners of the 1995 King of the Ring would have been either Savio Vega or the Roadie. A frightening thought. But then come to think of it, it was only a few years later. Didn't fucking Billy Gunn win King of the Ring one year? Like 98 or 99? So I guess anything is possible, right? In any case, we get to the end. There's a ref bump in the corner. Taker eventually hits a chokeslam on Mabel. And then as he goes to pin him, in runs Kama to kick Taker in the back of the head. And then Mabel dropped the leg over Taker's face and pinned him. And that was the spot where I thought Mabel legitimately broke Taker's face. But then Taker just sat up a minute later and ran Kama off to the back. And his face looked perfectly fine. Now, I just thought, watching this whole thing go down, how in the world any sane booker could look at this tournament and think Mabel should be the guy to win it? After this performance in particular, dude, this was by far one of the worst Taker matches I've ever seen. And I remember how bad that match in Mania 9 with Gonzalez was. Trust me, it was bad. But this was certainly not much better. God, the match went 5 minutes longer than it needed to be. That didn't help. But just like that, Mabel automatically qualifies for the finals. I think Shawn narrowly avoided escape on that one. Probably figured he was about to be roped into having to wrestle Mabel. He said, "You know, on second thought, just eliminate me in the first round. I'll eat the bullet." Good God. Can this pay-per-view get any worse? Well, in fact, it did. Because we still have to talk about the actual finals. First, let's barrel through this semifinal round with Savio and the Roadie. If this didn't already paint the picture of how bad things were in 95, two flunkies wrestling in the semifinal round of a fucking King of the Ring tournament. You may as well just hold up a cardboard sign that reads, "We'll wrestle for food." Can't get much lower than this. The story of this match is Savio doing everything to try to rally up the crowd to cheer for him. Nobody was having it. They just sat there in stone silence the entire time. It's a lifeless match. Road Dogg worked over Savio for an hour. Ended up missing a big diving elbow. They did some outside shenanigans with Double J running ref distractions until Savio ran the Roadie into Jarrett and then rolled him up for the pin. So let's recap. In the span of less than 24 hours, Savio Vega has now knocked off 3 separate opponents, one of whom is a former world champion from less than 2 years ago. If anyone else would like to call bullshit, I'm right there with you. Because I ain't buying it. Just like how nobody in this crowd was buying Savio Vega as a credible babyface opponent for Mabel. But before we get to that match, the one I've been dreading having to discuss. I thought I was going to be able to put it off longer, but I forgot this match happened much sooner than SummerSlam 95. It's Bret Hart versus Jerry Lawler in a Kiss My Foot match. Because apparently Vince caught on to foot fetishes sometime in 95 and said, "That'll make a great story, pal. Let's do it." Yeah. Let's have Lawler spend 3 months talking about fucking feet and see if we don't actively run off the entire fan base. Well, I'll say this. I didn't entirely boycott the match. Remove the dumbass stipulations behind everything. It was still Bret and Lawler. I knew what they were capable of doing in the ring. It was just the impending afterbirth that filled me with dread. So I tried to watch the match and not think about anything that would transpire afterwards. Because as you may know, I'm not too fond of feet. And it was a perfectly fine match, all things considered. I would not say it was the best match of either guy's career, but it wasn't bad. There were a lot of old school Memphis ideas they sprinkled in there. Like Lawler taking off the boot and using it behind the ref's back to get heat. Him jaw-jacking with the crowd and going for multiple pile drivers on Bret. Yeah, for the most part, they kept everything pretty basic. But it was never boring. And eventually they do the deal at the end where Hakushi runs out to try to attack Bret. But then he accidentally decks Lawler in the jaw with the right hand. And so Bret takes advantage. He eventually locks in the sharpshooter for the submission win. And the moment I saw Bret get on the turnbuckle pad and remove the boot, that's when I skipped ahead and said, all right, I've seen enough. I know where this goes. I don't need to further torture myself. The long and short of it is, they do a bunch of smoke and mirrors afterwards with all the heels. But after they get thwarted off, Bret stuck his foot down Lawler's throat and then humiliated him. And I think he ended up sticking Lawler's foot down his own throat. I didn't know Lawler was that flexible. It's impressive. You know, in all honesty, the match didn't go too long. I think it was somewhere in the ballpark of 9 minutes? Again, it was more about the angle afterwards. Getting over the babyface gets his revenge story. I'll say one thing about this. It is kind of strange to think that this is how the program basically ended between these two. Again, I know there's a whole thing with Isaac Yankem afterwards. Him being the kayfabe dentist of Lawler, and the feud does sort of continue after this. But in terms of Lawler-Hart singles matches, this is basically it. To my knowledge, I don't think they ever wrestled another one-on-one match in the WWF after this. It's another one of those top programs that just sort of uneventfully dies off, and they eventually quietly move both guys apart from each other. And obviously I know Bret's about to go away for a while too, so there's that. So minus the grossness with all the foot material, again, it's not a bad match. I just hated the backstory and all the bullshit that led up to this point. After 2 years of on and off investment, The lasting image of the Bret Hart-Jerry Lawler feud in WWF is Bret jamming his foot down Lawler's throat. What an image allegory for the history books. It was actually an allegory for this entire fucking pay-per-view. Because WWF shoved their foot down everybody's throats with this garbage event. So I guess we got to talk about it now. Gotten this far talking about all the prelim rounds. The finals of the 1995 King of the Ring. Mabel versus Savio Vega. The moment nobody's been waiting for. I honestly could not tell you what was worse here. Mabel holding Savio in a stationary bear hug for a legit 4-minute period. Or the crowd breaking out an ECW chant in the middle of the babyface comeback. That's got to be a first, too. I mean, WWF was right in the heart of hardcore fan country here. They knew it was going to be a smarter audience. They knew they were walking right into the lion's den. It was only a matter of time. And I think the fans held their patience long enough. After watching Mabel and Savio bore the brakes off of everybody for 8 minutes, they said, enough of this bullshit. Let's chant for Paul E's company. At least that garbage wrestling had excitement to it. No wonder people were antsy for cutting-edge television by the mid-90s. How could you not be after watching this snooze fest? I always love Michael Hayes with the bluntness. The spot where Razor helped Savio back in the ring to break the count. Hayes goes, well, if Razor didn't help him in, he'd have been counted out for sure. And Vince goes, well, I don't know about all that. And point blank, Hayes just goes, I do. Never a dull moment. What made it better, too, is the total awkward silence that followed. There's 10 seconds of dead air time where nobody says anything. Vince was suitably chastened here, and he knew it. So they're having this incredibly dull match. Savio was not over with the crowd, despite their best efforts to make him the most sympathetic babyface of all time. Epic failure. Eventually, Savio hits a spin heel kick on Mabel for a 2 count. They try to trade a couple near falls at the end to pick up the crowd. By that point, too little too late. They already turned on the match. And, we basically had Mabel catching Savio in a power slam position. And he hit him with a big splash and got the pin. And it is then anticlimactically stated that Mabel is the king of the ring. Sounded like the pilot casually announcing the plane landing. And so while the fans are booing the shit out of this, because they legitimately hated the match and the tournament, wasted 2 hours of our lives watching a bunch of shitty matches just to see Mabel win the fucking thing. So why not? Let's get more heat on the babyfaces. Have Mo and Mabel lay out Razor and Sean Waltman afterwards. So they beat up Razor and lay him out. Mabel nearly slipped on the middle rope trying to give him an elbow drop. That looked awful. And they were about to kill Waltman until refs ran down to put a stop to Mabel. I mean, on the one hand, I get it. They're trying to rocket ship push Mabel as a main eventer because they realize they need to build a credible heel for Diesel in a month or two. But this tournament did no favors in establishing Mabel as a threat. He could barely get through one match without looking like he was about to have a fucking heart attack. Yet somehow they thought him and Kevin Nash would be a good idea. For the belt, on a Big Four pay-per-view, no less, in Pittsburgh. I was so irritated. Funny how I completely forgot about the Bret Hart match with Isaac Yankem. I did not forget about Mabel and Diesel. How could anybody forget that calamity? But this is how it all started. King of the Ring 95. Vince's obsession with giant lumbering big men continues. And it doesn't get much more giant, lumbering, and big than King Mabel. And it only gets worse from here, folks. The push was not long, but it was quite torturous. And if that wasn't bad enough, then they made us suffer through the coronation ceremony, which was merely saved by two things. The one fan that was constantly sounding off an air horn the whole time, and King Mo reading the scroll with a straight face and not breaking character. Unfortunately, that part was only funny for about 10 seconds. Then he had to keep going for another 5. But we had one more match to truck through on this thing. Wasn't bad enough that the King of the Ring finals were beyond fucking atrocious. They said, you know what? Let's give them more. Let's close it out with a tag match featuring Diesel and Bam Bam Bigelow versus a $1 million corporation that goes, not kidding you, 17 minutes and 25 seconds. In what universe did anybody think that was a remotely good idea? 17 minutes and 25 seconds for this fucking thing? For a completely uneventful tag match with no excitement value? Because the fans were totally burnt out and tired, and they just wanted to go home? So, of course, the story here. Diesel just came back from elbow surgery. So, he's out there wearing this giant elbow brace. He's barely mobile as it is. The heels are working that over early on. There are pockets of moments where you can hear a few people chanting for Diesel. By and large, everybody else just kind of sat there emotionless. You know, Bam Bam was easily the most over guy in the whole thing. Which is ironic, because I don't even think he had worked for ECW by this point. I mean, this might have been the moment where Heyman was scoping him out for when his contract eventually expired. Said, I got to get my hands on that guy. He would fit right in with the ECW boys. So it becomes a role reversal where the heels end up beating on Bam Bam for a little bit. And by a little bit, I mean an eternity. I did like Vince pointing out that Sid was not a technical savant in the ring. I wonder how he came to that conclusion. I did kind of get legitimately angry when Vince tried to call this match a seesaw match. I was like, what are you watching, dude? Are we in the same room? The heels have been working over Bam Bam for 12 fucking minutes. In what way is this a seesaw match? Piss off. Diesel ran wild for like a minute before re-injuring his elbow and then tagging back out. Like, no joke. The match was heat. Diesel flurry of offense for 30 seconds, re-injures the elbow, tags back out the Bam Bam. Heat. Diesel come back for 5 seconds. And after approximately 15 minutes of nothing happening action, Diesel goes to powerbomb Tatanka, Of course, he fucks it up because he always does. But then he pulls Tatanka off the mat. He looks up. He points to Sid and says, "I want you." And then Sid just kind of saunters off. He leaves Tatanka high and dry, as chicken shit heels would. And I think the camera actually missed a spot. I'm pretty sure Diesel dropped an elbow on Tatanka for the actual pin, but I don't think we saw it. It was some kind of offensive maneuver. But that's how it ended. After Diesel and Sid already had come to blows multiple times during the match, Sid just decided, you know what? I've been out here for almost 20 minutes. I've had enough. I'm going to leave. And then everybody cheered after Diesel won. Probably because they were thinking, thank God this fucking thing is finally over. Because that's what I thought afterwards. I said, thank Christ. We can put this thing to bed and never speak of it again. And I said I was going to do it. Just to have a little bit of fun here, because fuck this show. This show sucked a wet dick. I want to read you a few comments that news reporters and dirt sheets had left after this pay-per-view unfolded. You will notice a common theme breakout amongst all of them. This is a 2015 review from Ken Patoya at 411 Mania. And I quote, "In the running for the worst WWF pay-per-view in history, I've yet to review one worse, though I can recall a worse WCW one." Editor's note here. I can only speculate which one he's talking about. Continuing, nothing on the show is redeemable. The nonsensical booking, the boring matches, and the painfully boring main event were all horrible. Everyone in attendance deserved a refund and have the show wiped from their memory. So Kevin was not a fan. How about John Canton at TGR Wrestling? Quote, "This is one of the worst pay-per-views in WWE history. Rating it 3 out of 10 might be generous by me. That's how bad it is. Choosing Mabel to win King of the Ring meant 2 bad matches from him, while the great Shawn Michaels only got to wrestle once. Meanwhile, there was a lot of Savio Vega, and I don't know if people were clamoring for him. The show was also hurt by the lack of a WWE title match, since Diesel only wrestled in a tag match that really didn't feel like a big deal." I will respond to that by saying this. Nobody at this point was clamoring for a Diesel singles match either. So I'd be hesitant to agree with the sentiment on Diesel being stuck having to wrestle a tag match. Nobody wanted to see Diesel wrestle, period. Also, the great Shawn Michaels comment can blow me. And the final one I'll read is a Paul Matthews report from a website that I failed to write down, and I'm not going to go back and check. Quote, "Was this the worst pay-per-view of all time? It is certainly near the bottom. I would call it the most disappointing one of all time. They could have put together a better tournament with their roster. Vince chose to push one of the worst choices imaginable. In order to not sacrifice anyone too big for that experiment, he had to fill the brackets with lesser stars. He shot himself in the foot and the show suffered for it. It's unfortunate Diesel couldn't wrestle a one-on-one match in his condition. However, they could have booked a better main event. This pay-per-view is the epitome of bad booking in '95. So there you have it. Not a highly regarded WWF pay-per-view. I'm not going to read you the Meltzer star ratings because I promise you, They were not good. And all kidding aside, it is easy enough for me to sit here and co-sign all those reports. But I got nothing else to add. Show fucking sucked. What more do you want me to say? It was a lousy, awful WWF pay-per-view that pretty much encapsulated everything wrong with the product in 95. We constantly beat on the Raws, saying they're the dirt worst of WWF programming at any point in the 90s. This kind of sprang to mind just a minute ago. I was thinking about it. Meltzer and Alvarez were getting into it over something. And I can't remember how the conversation came up, but they got onto this topic of which period was worse for the WWF. 95 or some part of the 2010s. I think they were specifically talking about the latter half of the decade, from 2018 to 2020. I think it was Meltzer that tried to defend the idea that 95 was far worse. And I am certainly not a Meltzer advocate. Rarely do I ever find myself agreeing with him on anything. I'm actually prone to agree with Alvarez more often than not. Not in this case. I'm with Meltzer 100% of the way. Whatever garbage WWE was producing at the tail end of the 2010 decade, I promise you, it was not worse than this hot garbage. Fuck, dude. All-time bad pay-per-view. It really is. And everything that transpired as a result leading into the latter portion of that same year, this shit continues to get worse and worse and worse and worse. And lucky us, we get to turn things over and talk about the following night's Raw. Speaking of things getting progressively worse. And I actually had to take a 24-hour break before I even considered watching Raw. That King of the Ring pay-per-view was so ungodly bad. I couldn't even stomach the idea of trying to watch another 45 minutes of this shite. So I got up on Saturday morning, went to the gym for about an hour and a half, came back and sat in the sun for, a good 30 to 45 minutes. And upon mentally preparing myself for this horror show, I said, well, I'm now in a reasonably good mood. Let us immediately ruin it by watching this June 26th Raw from 1995. Lesson learned. If you need a surefire way to ruin your good mood, watch any episode of Retro Raw from 1995. God, the fucking balls of these people. Daring to advertise an encore presentation for that fucking clown show of a pay-per-view. An encore feature. What they should have done is bury that thing 6 feet under and never speak of it again. Pretend it never happened. King Mabel? The hell are you talking about? I know of no such thing. So Raw here. They open up things with Shawn Michaels coming down to ringside. He's wearing a see-through mesh top. Because of course he is. I especially liked him conveniently placing his sunglasses inside the holes of the shirt. Because did I mention, he also had sunglasses. Because he's a douche. And only douchebags wear shades indoors. Funny how he's not even remotely angry about being forced out of the tournament from the night prior. He's just out there being asshole prick Sean, showboating to the crowd, smiling, smacking his gum around. No fucks given on his end. Probably because he realized he had to call a smoking guns match. And he said, well, I gotta entertain myself somehow. The first match on the program is the Smoking Guns versus Jason Hart and The Phantom. Not the Green Phantom. Just The Phantom. I was trying to remember who it was in Crockett Promotions that worked the mass job guy gimmick. Wasn't it just the Grim Reaper? And like he only showed up around October. I'd have loved to have seen him and the Phantom work underneath matches as a tag team. But only during the Halloween season. They never win matches. They just get to go out there and be spoopy. I mean, they basically used the whole segment to let everybody know that King Mabel won the following night. The Guns won with a backbreaker leg drop combo. And they still nearly fucked up 3 other double team spots beforehand. But at least they hit their finish. It's all that matters. And then we immediately segue into our first pre-tape for Isaac Yankem, the kayfabe dentist of Jerry Lawler. Some may better know him as Mayor Glenn Jacobs of Knoxville County, Tennessee. I think he also had another famous gimmick at one point that I'm just not remembering off the top of my head. I think it involved fire and demonic shit that may have had some kind of relation to another demonic gimmick in the late 90s. You know, it all kind of blends together at some point. Well, in any case, sarcasm aside, Lawler is standing outside Yankem's office door. He was drilling and or operating on another patient. Couldn't make out which one. We just heard copious amounts of screaming. Meanwhile, Lawler's standing outside the door chewing gum and brushing his teeth, trying to get the remaining stench of Brett's feet out of his mouth. He says that Isaac Yankem, under a previous assumed name, was a professional wrestler before he became a certified dentist. And when Lawler told him the story about Bret Hart and what he did at King of the Ring the following night, it motivated Yankem to come out of retirement and then get back into the ring to handle Bret personally. For the record, I'm doing my best to recap this without making a complete mockery of the entire segment. The skit sucked. You could barely make out what Lawler was saying because he was constantly putting more gum in his mouth and then rinsing it out with mouthwash. I mean, it just sounded like mumbling and grunting the whole time. But yes, Isaac Yankem DDS. He is coming. And thankfully not for long. Because even WWF realized early on, you know, this guy's actually got something. Only took him another 2 years before they finally said, instead of firing the guy, how about we actually stick him under a gimmick that doesn't outright suck a mass cock? And we haven't even gone to fake Diesel yet. But yeah, by 1997, the rest is history. They unfortunately never figured it out with poor Chris Candido. I mean, once they saddled him with a Body Donna gimmick, you could pretty much write him off. Ain't no recovery from that atrocity. So he wrestled Scott Taylor this week. Sonny was actually trying to be an effective heel on the floor for like 3 seconds by calling all the fans fat and out of shape. But of course, Shawn and Vince spent the entire time talking over her, so you couldn't hear a goddamn thing she was trying to say. Fucking morons. mean, the wrestling here is by and large fine. Nobody gives a shit because the gimmick is trash. It's dying to death on TV. Meanwhile, Chris is out there doing fucking suicide dives and hurricane ranas, the whole 9 yards. Working way too hard for something incredibly stupid. I did like seeing him pin Scott while doing push-ups on his chest. That was innovative. I don't really think I've ever seen anybody do that before. I mean, it's sad. You know, again, I've already done the rant on the Body Donnas thing. And especially if you knew the kind of talent Chris Candido actually was. Such a waste. And yeah, Tammy was always kind of seen as the attraction in the whole thing. That's the other sad part about the Tammy-Chris relationship. You know, the fact that Tammy always kind of overshadowed him and Chris kind of got left in the dust. And the WWF run was a clear-cut example of that. I mean, we still haven't gotten to the stuff with Dr. Tom yet, so we're still very early into the run. I always forget this thing goes on for like another year and a half before they finally scrap it. It was awful from day one. So naturally, Vince said, "Let's keep going with it, pal. It's such good shit." You know what wasn't good shit? Todd Pettingill trying to convince us, the TV audience, that King of the Ring 95 is must-see. And that we must order the replay, or we're missing out. I wrote the following words down, and I meant every part of it. Fuck you, Todd. Fuck you, Vince. I hope you both get testicular cancer for spreading such farcical nonsense. Must-see event. Yeah, if you're desperate to get away from your nagging wife for 3 hours, maybe I can make a case for that. Elsewise, I'd have more fun taking a dip in boiling peanut oil. Speaking of things I'd rather be doing than watching this garbage content, Mad Mountain Rock beat Phil Apollo in a match that nobody cared about. I was actually looking ahead to see when the next In Your House special was, because I know I have to keep tracking these as we're moving through the timeline. Apparently the next one is scheduled for July 23rd, so I'll have to remember that. And by we, I mean me. Totally won't forget. Just like we did with the second Clash of Champions. The advertised main event for that special is Diesel and Sid for the WWF title. A rematch from In Your House 1. Because it was so great the first time around, we just had to do it again. God, no wonder Diesel's title reign sucks so bad. Look at who he was put up against. Multiple matches with Psycho Sid. Fucking King Mabel. What's the next step below that? Haystacks Calhoun. Giant Gonzalez. On the topic of Mabel, this is our first look at him being carried out to the ring on his giant throne. With a frickin' giant sword. I love that thing. So dumb. And those poor souls that had to carry that big tub of goo all the way down the aisleway. I mean, there were a good 5 or 6 of them, too. They looked like they were in reasonably good shape, but that's like, what? 600 pounds of Mabel plus a 150-pound giant throne contraption? And those guys were probably in physical therapy for weeks after this. So he beat up Kenny Kendall for a while and then won with a belly-to-belly. They are, they're certainly trying with him. It's about the best compliment I can give for the push of King Mabel in mid to late 95. You knew what you were getting with him. If King of the Ring didn't already encapsulate it, I don't know what else to tell you. The question is he still better or worse than Waylon Mercy? No, quite frankly, anything is better than Waylon Mercy. Chlamydia, you could argue, is better than Waylon Mercy. Because at least that's curable. Ain't nothing curable about having to watch a Danny Spivey match. As we'll come to find out later during his WCW run. Anyway, more creepy shit with him. He's coming to the WWF to do stuff. And by that, I mean have boring matches and not be over at all. So we eventually get the TV main event. It's Jeff Jarrett versus Savio Vega for the Intercontinental title. How in the fuck do I not remember this completely random babyface push of Savio Vega in 1995? Probably because it was a drop in the bucket and then quickly forgot about. It's just so weird. Like, right up until Razor gets injured, Savio is just a guy on the show. And all of a sudden, he's showing up and almost winning the 1995 King of the Ring. He's getting title shots the following night. The fuck is going on here? He must have had dirt on somebody. I mean, the action's fine. Just ridiculous to think that Savio went from being a nobody to a somebody in less than 48 hours. It's funny how the camera guy was meticulously making sure to get as many shots of the Road Dogg as he could. Because he was sort of the highlight in all this. I mean, his reactions to everything were amazing. Like, anytime Double J got hit with a move or taken off his feet, Road Dogg's doing this over-dramatic face palm, or he's hiding his face in the corner and then pounding the mat like, God damn it all. He was the best. I love Brian Armstrong. True underrated all-timer. Sean mocking Road Dogg's hair was kind of funny. He goes, there's no way that's real. Come on now. Talk about comments that did not age well. And granted, Sean and the Roadie were sort of a central focus of the match. You know, they're out working angles on the floor. It wound up breaking down between them after the Roadie accidentally got bumped into Sean. And those two started throwing hands. I like when we see Sean going at it with Jarrett. Fucking Hebner's standing right there pretending like he can't see it. And like 5 seconds after that, Savio tries to roll up Jarrett and pin him. And then Road Dogg just comes in and takes out Savio for the DQ. Because did I mention, Savio has now made it to the point where he's now capable of nearly putting away champions. Because this booking makes so much sense. And, how they do the deal at the end where Sean and Savio run off the heels. Crowd was into that stuff because Sean's at least reasonably over by this point. More so than Savio, that's for sure. I mean, it's a fine little TV main event, but my God, I can't get over the Savio push. It's ridiculous. I'm just truly baffled by all the bad shit I'm remembering around this point. There are certain periods throughout 95 where I'm like, yeah, you know, that thing sucked. That thing sucked. Business overall was down. Wasn't a good year, blah, blah. I think I really underestimated just how rotten things were, dude. Some of this stuff, like, seriously, how in the fuck is any of this remotely watchable? The Body Donnas, Waylon Mercy, King Mabel out there with a fucking sword and throne, Isaac Yankem. Just one bad gimmick after another. That's all the WWF was in 1995. They were so behind the times, man. This was bad 80s cartoon wrestling cranked up and marketed to a smarter audience that just wasn't having it. I mean, the fans chanting for ECW during the finals of the King of the Ring tournament. That ought to tell you everything right there. They were so out of touch. And Vince spent another year and a half trying to force this outdated garbage down people's throats. I mean, he eventually reluctantly went the other direction. But it was like pulling teeth. Figuratively. All right, I'm done. I want to talk about NXT here. For once, I'm actually eager to talk about an episode of NXT. That's how much WWF's done a number on me with those rotten television programs. And it's funny, too, because I even knew going into this week that the main event was going to be Adrian Neville versus Rob Van Dam. And I was like, well, I'm certainly not an RVD fan. Fuck, at this rate, I mean, anything's better than the crap I just put myself through in the past 24 hours. I'll watch 100 RVD matches before I ever watch the 1995 King of the Ring ever again. And there were some other things on this week's show that were good. It wasn't just the main event. As always, I'm going to have to cherry pick through a decent amount of crap to find the good stuff. But they were there in spurts. Once you get past a lot of the bad acting. I'm still kind of on the fence when it comes to this whole vaudevillains material. I'm not quite ready to pass them off just yet. They're right at that threshold of being too over the top without actually exceeding the line. Because again, I noted last week, at least their matches aren't insulting. They do at least try to go out there and be legit pro wrestlers when the bell rings. I mean, the gimmick is just wacky beyond imagination. I did kind of like Aiden announcing their team at a combined height of 12 feet 7 inches. That was crafty. Crowd got a pop out of that one. Again, they're still doing the whole 1940s shtick with the black and white grainy entrance. The announcers are making jokes about Simon Gotch being able to bench press 500 pounds with one hand. Apparently, he also styles his mustache with bear fat. Got to make sure it's oiled enough. They hadn't quite invented beard oil as of 2014, apparently. And they wrestled some guy with the last name Sugarman, who, according to Renee, was apparently an advocate of Bastion Booger once upon a time. And his partner was actually Elias Sampson, who just had some generic job guy name around this point. Again, still have no idea if these guys are faces or heels. The crowd is totally into the act, but I'm pretty sure they're technically supposed to be bad guys. Hence the name Vaudevillains. Really not much to say about the match. Gotch did a cool head scissors push-up combo to Elias at one point, where he had his legs wrapped around him, but he was still doing push-ups at the same time. It was impressive. They won with the same combo from last week. The fireman's carry roll-through and then the senton splash deal. And of course, because this is WWE circa 2014, everybody had some stupid, wacky name for their finish at this point. So the announcers, with a straight face, have to go, they call that, "That's a wrap." Because it's catchy, you see. It's symbolic. It's cringe is what it is. Don't quite know if that finish stuck the landing. But what do I know? So as we wait to hear more about the Vaudevillains and their ilk, We got a quick recap package for the fallout from last week's main event, with Tyson turning on Sammy in the tag match with the Ascension. And Sammy's not too happy about that, as you would probably imagine. I liked how his way of reasoning with Tyson beforehand was, sometimes you've got to lose before you win. Not saying that I like losing. No, of course not, Sammy. It just seems to be your track record in NXT for the last year plus. The story is, you're a loser and you can't win a match to save your life. No wonder Tyson turned on your dumb ass. The hell kind of prep speech is that? Trying to motivate your partner for a title match, and your big idea is, sometimes you've got to eat a loss along the way, man. It's the way of life. Fuck that noise. I'll just go my own way. So up next we had Xavier Woods versus Bull Dempsey, with CJ Parker still picketing the arena with his climate change signs. I think this is the week where Renee just finally broke the fourth wall and said, this guy needs to pursue a different line of work. No, she was half right. He stayed in wrestling. He just needed to leave this godforsaken cesspool to make a name for himself. So Bull's an interesting cat. He's actually been around for a while, but I think this is where they actually started to give him a little bit of his own push. He had his own music and everything here. Kind of had the classic territorial grungy heel look. He was a big, ugly, mean guy with a relatively unimpressive body, but it worked for him. Kind of had a Bruiser Brody look, just without the star power or the name recognition. It's weird too, because I remember the name when he came out. I vaguely recall they do something with him and Baron Corbin a bit later on before they eventually turn him face and start doing all the bullfit stuff, which never really caught on. And it's a shame because, I mean, they definitely tried with him. I just don't think he ever really got it. You know, he was always missing something. I don't even remember if he ever made it to the main roster before he got released. And as far as I know, again, people can correct me if I'm wrong, I don't think he's ever made an appearance outside maybe some local indie shows. AEW's never used them. He's never come back to WWE as far as I remember. It's just another name that kind of seeped through the cracks and was lost and forgotten about. I mean, he had a decent showing here with Woods. Kind of worked a traditional bar fight brawl style, which was perfect for Woods, because he could sell the shit out of that offense. I mean, the crowd kind of warmed up to him eventually, but it took a while. Nothing flashy. Just beat up Woods for a bit. Pancaked him in the corner with a splash. Then he scooped up Woods and hit him with a modified power slam for the 3. And yet again, these fucking announcers pissing me off. I don't remember who the guy's name was, the main play-by-play guy. But he had to point out, he calls that the bulldozer. Get it? The bulldozer. Fuck you. And then the show immediately took a nosedive. And you may be asking, what would be the cause of that? Surely it couldn't be the ladies. Well, Indeed it was. And this segment in particular, this was an infamous moment. An easy candidate for the list of top 10 worst NXT moments of all time. At the time, if you had no expectations of her future, I mean, you probably wrote it off as another failed WWE experiment. But because we knew who she'd become in several years, you look back at moments like this and just wonder, God, what the fuck were these idiots thinking? And of course, I'm talking about the debut of Becky Lynch. Not the man Becky Lynch. Oh, no. We are far removed from that. No, this was Vince's vision of Becky Lynch here in 2014. Because you see, Becky was from Ireland. And if there's one thing we all know about the Irish, they all love the following three things: clovers, the color green, and really cringe Irish dancing routines. So naturally, guess what Becky's first gimmick was? And it is just as bad as we all remember it being. I mean, I knew it sucked in 2014. It equally sucks the same here in 2024. And look, I'm not going to belabor the point. Everybody knows how much this bombed. Even Becky's been on record talking about how much it bombed. I mean, you want proof? Go listen to that 2-minute clip of her on Chris Van Vliet's podcast where she's just skewering WWE creative for this shit show of an idea. What does she say? I think it was, I'd put that above the Shockmaster in terms of all-time god-awful in-ring debuts. I mean, I don't know if I'd agree with all that. But it was certainly no good. It's hard to justify it. I mean, I truly don't know what the end game here was. Intentional career sabotage? Were they just that clueless? I have no idea. But everybody universally agrees that this gimmick was death. It didn't help her cause any that she had to go out there and wrestle Summer Rae. God, this segment blew. It was so bad. From the Irish jig stuff, the dance-off with Becky and Summer that just was completely devoid of merit. Not to mention Summer Rae going out there and trying to be a legit pro wrestler when she could barely pass as an athlete. Fuck. Yeah, this definitely ranks among the all-time worst NXT segments. There's just nothing redeemable about it. Everything about it was ass. The Becky gimmick, the shitty match, Summer Rae being totally out to lunch in the ring, the crowd being completely apathetic toward anything. Frankly, I can't believe she ever recovered from it. That's probably why I have so much respect for Becky as a talent all these years later. I mean, you really think about it, by all means, this should have killed her career from the minute she came out. Somehow she overcame the bad booking and said, I'm going to earn brownie points with these people. I will earn their respect. And that is more than I can say for Charlotte and Sasha, who never earned that credential in WWE. Charlotte, because she was pounded into that top spot from day one, despite never having to earn anything. And Sasha, because she's just a whiny, entitled bitch that never drew a dime and nobody ever saw as a main eventer in WWE. So hats off to Becky. She took an all-time clunker and turned that into a WrestleMania payday several years down the road. WrestleMania main event, no less. Not a lot of people you can ever claim ever did that. Especially not the girls. So then we moved to Big Cass versus Sawyer Fulton. It went 1 minute. Cass's offense consisted of the following two moves: a blatant thigh slap big boot, and an Empire elbow for the three. Had to find him for the thigh slap. Other than that, it was fine. But the bigger story here was the return of Enzo Amore, who got a pretty massive pop when he came out. You had the French Legionnaires come out to try to jump Cass, but then Enzo sprints down the aisleway and somehow manages to run off them both. Yeah, that's right. The 150-pound crazy loudmouth from Brooklyn scared off the two bigger heels. You go figure that one out. And then he did his whole shtick, which the crowd chanted along with. Because that's basically how these guys got over. And it's kind of a thing that people can still recite almost verbatim to this day. If you ask the average WWE fan, they'd probably be able to rattle off most of the whole thing from start to finish. Just a shame that Enzo couldn't get out of his own way in this company. Because, man, you look back in moments like this and you realize just how popular these two were. And it never really got out of first gear on the main roster. And granted, that was sort of a mix of bad booking along with Enzo just being an annoying piece of shit. You know, the guy can never stay out of trouble. But, no, there were a lot of reasons that team flunked. But his leg is healed up, so he's back. Can't say the same for his brain. But I guess we'll be hearing more about the nature of soft in weeks to come. And then as advertised, the TV main event was Adrian Neville versus RVD. The childhood hero of Neville, I believe. Or at least somebody he admired growing up as a kid. I could definitely see that. It was probably a cool moment for him. Tyler Breeze was on commentary here. I tried to block him out as much as I could. It's always astonishing when you go back and see clips of older guys in the business and you realize that they're like 6 inches bigger than so many of the younger guys coming up through the ranks. Seeing RVD visually tower over Neville here was almost incredible. He looked like fucking Andre standing next to him. And Van Damme's like, what, 6 feet at the most? Maybe 6'1"? I mean, he absolutely dwarfed Neville here. But they worked hard. Overall, I would say the match was fine. A couple visibly sloppy moments. But that's sort of a given when you're watching an RVD match. I mean, he was always a pretty reckless worker. Hence why I was never a fan of his. I mean, after doing the same 6 or 7 moves in a row for your entire career, you figure you might be able to polish them at some point. But they went a long time. I mean, they gave this thing well over 15 minutes. It was pretty steadily back and forth. It was primarily a babyface match, so it was hard to figure out who to cheer for at certain points. But Neville fired back at the end. He and Rob were going at it with standoff kicks to the shin until Neville got the better of him. It ends up with him spiking Rob for a DDT, and then hitting his red arrow for the finish. And they both do the little handshake sign of respect afterwards, which, again, it was fine. They set up that Neville respected RVD growing up, so, you know, the handshake made sense. Kind of surprised they didn't have Breeze try to jump him afterwards. They just kind of went to the end credits after Van Dam left. That was pretty much it. You know, again, there was a lot to take away from the episode as a whole. The Becky Lynch thing stands out above everything else. It was so terrible. But the main event was good. Not really a heat angle or promo-centered episode. But they're moving in the right direction with a lot of the key storylines. A couple reappearing faces. I mean, yeah, this is probably the first episode in a while where I started to see signs of the old black and gold brand that people were raving about back in the day. And there's still way too many goofy gimmicks crowding the field. But the silliness was toned down a little bit. And that's what I'm always looking for in my wrestling content, you know? I'm okay with comedy when it's warranted. But generally speaking, anything that resembles Mid-South formatting is exactly what I'm looking for. So I'll give this show a thumbs up for the effort. It wasn't Mid-South level good, but it was a step up from what they've been currently doing. So as we round out this one, it's going to be a longer Monday episode, but I am drained, spent, exhausted, fatigued, over it. So make sure you guys come back on Friday to check out the continuation of the Classic Review series. You know, we're kind of getting into the point now where, God, I've been doing away with SmackDown for so long. Like, if I even tried to review that show next Monday, it's going to seem like I haven't watched that show in a year. I have no idea what's been happening. I know I missed the Chicago show, and that's when Punk got jumped by Drew. I think I saw a couple clips show up for that. So, it's kind of disappointing. But, you know, try to get back into the swing of things next time. I think we finally are at the point now where there's a gap with some of these classic reviews. So if I wanted to include a third segment, I guess SmackDown would be the go-to. But we'll see. So thanks, everybody. And catch you all soon. Take care. Peace out.